Please join us today in a fascinating conversation with Victoria Coffin of the Bay Area Climate Change Council, also known as BACCC. The Council is a collective of member organizations in the Hamilton-Burlington area. BACCC is guided by the members' vision of the Bay Area as a thriving and resilient net zero carbon community by 2050. The organization harnesses the diversity of expertise in its collective and the power of collaboration across community to advance climate action. BACCC has prioritized three big areas that represent 95% of the Bay Area's greenhouse gases: transportation, buildings, and industry, also known as the Big Three. The organization's fourth priority is to facilitate the Bay Area's transition to low-emissions energy systems. BACCC ensures that our initiatives are informed by the principles of truth and reconciliation, as well as principles of equity, diversity, and inclusion. This conversation complements our recently published Community Data Watch report on home energy poverty at Community Development Halton, which aims to raise awareness and inform community members, residents, and decision makers about home energy poverty in Halton region. Check out a link to this report in the show notes, along with information related to the Bay Area Climate Change Council. My interview with Victoria is introduced by a recording taken during the BACCC's recent Community Equity Workshop that took place on July 15th. Our group took part in a scenario that involved working through challenges relating to a flooding emergency. We were tasked with a role, and we worked together to assess the situation and address the gifts and needs of our neighbors. What follows are some excerpts from our post-workshop reflection, which includes themes present in our Data Watch report and in the long-form conversation that I had with Victoria, such as getting to know your neighbors and what it means to foster connection at the local level. We hope you will enjoy this conversation, and be sure to visit us on our respective websites to learn more about upcoming events and gatherings that are related to energy, climate, and much more.
I think this has inspired me to want to get to know my neighbors more, and it's who's physically in close proximity to me, because I don't know really who my neighbors are. I live in a condo. I don't know everyone on my condo floor. I know there's a little lady down the way that me and my partner will check on every now and then. But I would know if there's kids, if there's pets, if there's, and also what useful skills these people have. Maybe there's somebody who's really good at sewing and could help mend something, so I don't need to throw something out. Or somebody who could help with really good with auto repairs if something happened to my car or something like that. So I think, a big takeaway from this is just how integral that community experience is, and it's made me want to get to know my neighbors more.
A lady on the court we live on has years, she's passed now, but 20 years ago, she created a neighborhood list. So each house, it could be each condo, that on this piece of paper, somebody has to do it. But it's somebody has to do it. But I'm sorry. There's a list of the address or the number, and then who lives there, the name of their children if they want them listed, the name of their pets if they want them listed, and their phone number. And so it's just great. So when you see them, you can read them by name, or at least check the sheet when you get home, because of course nobody can ever remember the names of people they just see intermittently. So it's just a marvelous piece of glue. Mary Madison Sheet.
Yes, and the amount of extroversion it takes to be the ones that do the initiative to say, I'm okay.
With a computer, it's really quick. Yes. So the next.
Yes, good about the last year.
One thing is just the importance of knowing your fellow man, because you never know what skill a person may have that might be useful to you, especially going back to the game, who may know how to filter water, because you never know, when it comes to stormwater management, you don't know the bacteria that are in there. Maybe your own neighbor might be able to boil water, or in an instance for me, one of my neighbors, her daughter dropped a plushie down in this hole, and unfortunately her mother was not physically able to do so. So as a community member and as a neighbor, because we live in a kind of apartment, condo, duplex, whatever thing, so I was able to volunteer myself to get down, because unfortunately if she were to do it, she would hurt herself, and her daughter would have the unfortunate sight of seeing her mom get hurt. So because I took out the initiative to go hop down a ledge and get her daughter's plushie and everything, I was able to foster that relationship with my neighbor, and since then it's been good. And also going back to one of the previous workshops of being able to foster that connection, because during the break we talked about how social isolation was a big thing that occurred during the pandemic. We were all physically and socially isolated from each other, and it doesn't help that we have phones that you can just send a quick text and everything, which there's nothing wrong with that, but sometimes you need to have that face-to-face connection in order to not only name a face, but also to foster that connection with someone, so that if you need something from someone and phone services are down, you can at least knock on their door for their help and everything.
I don't know if this is just to round it up, but I know that I seen on TikTok they had a thing for pets. It was a little paw light that lets the firefighters know that there's an animal in that area, because I know dogs or cats like to go hide somewhere because they're scared, they don't know what's going on. So it's a little paw light that activates when it gets smoke with a carbon dioxide, and then it alerts. So if that's more possible, again, something like that for to the animals, because the animals can't talk, you know, and some of the dogs are like little chihuahuas, you can't see them.
Yeah. So just to share an example, kind of akin to Victoria, to your point about the story you had with emergency preparedness, and like most of what I've learned in the last year about how to survive in any kind of unpredictable situation, I've learned from some of our unhoused neighbors that I work a lot with CDH, and it's funny because, like, well, not funny, but like I spent the first half of today doing encampment outreach with two of our peer researchers that have lived experience with living in encampments. And, you know, we're going out, we're just connecting with people and hearing their stories and hearing what they need or want to see happen, and trying to, you know, bridge gaps in our services from that. But the whole time we were navigating, you know, the woods, and like we went into some thickets, we went into, like, you know, not all of them were right on the road. And it wasn't our first time going out, but, you know, the two folks I went with, the whole time they were sharing stories about, oh, this is what you look for when you want to stay dry in a tent. This is what you need. This is the perfect tree trunk to hang something from, like a tarp, right? Or, and this is the ideal ground that you want to be looking for. This is how hidden you want it to be. And, you know, there's a real logic to it. And I think that when we go back to that idea of who do we recognize as having gifts or wisdom that we can learn from, and not to say like we need to just extract this knowledge from people that are unhoused, but it's the idea that, like, in relationship with others that have different lived experiences, we can gain a lot of wisdom that then helps us survive too, and other people. Like I would be useless by myself. Like I will just say that I love camping, but if I was alone and trying to survive, I would not make it. So yeah, it's humbling.
I think we all would be. I think that brings this humans being social creatures aspect together. And I would also corroborate that in Hamilton, there's a lot of encampment outreach. And I was on a shift last night at an encampment actually, and folk came out and had, you know, blood trailing down his face. It was quite grotesque, and, you know, one of the other unhoused volunteers immediately got up on the first day and started sterilizing, whereas I had to like oh my gosh, what do we do now? Do we call someone? And I was like, oh no, we can handle this ourselves. Yeah. And so I think in terms of, you know, volunteering with local encampment outreaches, unhoused folks in terms of emergency skills and the application of that almost daily is, not to be underlooked at all. Thank you. And that brings us to the end of today's workshop. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Yeah, there we go. Okay, so I am here. I'm joined today by Victoria Coffin. Welcome, Victoria, and thank you for meeting with us today.
Thank you for having me, Stephen. This is I'm excited about this conversation.
Likewise. So what, just out of curiosity, Victoria, what are you working on right now that you're most excited about?
Well, the Bay Area Climate Change Council, so I'm going to use BACCC as the short form because it's quite a long name. I'm excited this year about two pieces that kind of fit together. One of them is the focus on the transition to clean energy. So we're focused on this as one of our priorities, and we're working towards an event in the fall, which will bring together, all the interested parties to talk about how we do that in a way that supports, economic growth as well as supports, people who are facing, challenges paying for their electricity or their heating and cooling, that they also can participate. So that's kind of the theme I'm most excited about. And as part of that, though, we've been also thinking about how we translate the language of climate change generally into the language that
Mm,
really matters to people because people, and I think a lot of people, we've been talking about climate for a long time. People understand in theory and sort of in big picture. But I think that sometimes, especially now that we're seeing the impact in our weather patterns, I think for us, for average people, sometimes speaking to the things that really impact them personally is a great way to start
mm.
that conversation. And so, we've been having the internal conversations, we've been having conversations with other community organizations about, the need to start, thinking about how we translate into the language that, people just can connect with.
Language that people can connect with. Yeah, I really appreciate that point, especially like what comes to mind when you were sharing about like that question of personal impact. Like what is it like how is it that these changing patterns in our weather and our climate is impacting people at the local level?
Mhm.
That's really, really interesting, especially like with these events coming up on the ground to be able to meet people face to face and learn about how some of these changes are impacting them and what we can do together as a community. Like that's
Mhm.
very exciting.
Yes, and I love what you say about doing it as a community because
Mm-hmm.
that's the other piece of it. So many organizations, like your own organization, like our organization, trying to do good in the communities. And so the next stage is also like, how do we work together? How do we collaborate, right?
Mm-hmm. That
Yeah.
collaboration right there. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I can think of a million reasons why it would be important for me and others, but like just out of curiosity, why is this important to you?
Yeah, I think that so I guess the first part, so I gave you kind of a two-part answer, right? The one was the sort of theme and event that's coming up that's focused on this clean energy transition. And then the second part was translating, into the matters that into the language that matters to people. So the first one, why it's important to me is because honestly, energy it underpins everything, right? And so our ability to anticipate the best possible future means that we need to be dealing with that energy system that underpins everything that we do. It's becoming important also from an energy justice perspective because as I understand, I mean a huge percentage of our homes are not don't have air conditioning, for example. So if
Mm,
we get a spell of really hot, humid weather, which we've had recently, um, people will be impacted by the fact that they don't have access to, say, the cooling. And the second part for those who are on lower incomes is they probably don't have the money to go out and urgently buy an air conditioner, right?
right.
And when you look at what happened with, I think it was in BC, they had heat domes. BC and Alberta had heat dome issues
Oh, I remember hearing about
21 or
that.
22, where Lytton, the town in sort of central north BC or north central BC, was kind of, burned to the ground. Um, we see that it really does impacts people's quality of life, but also their very survival. So, um,
Oh, it's that, yeah, it's intense, but it's real. I mean, and that piece about energy, about the climate justice aspect is really, I think, really important that you touched on that because I think back, I feel like I might have mentioned this when we spoke last week about a study that we were involved in last summer around surveying people across the community to hear about, like what who's heat vulnerable or who's vulnerable to
Mhm.
extreme heat weather events, and what do they do in response to that? Like when we have a heat dome or just a heat wave for a few days or whatever the case may be, what does it look like for folks to stay cool during those events? And what we found, like the deeper we dived in, was that there were really big in inequalities in the way that people, like the access that people have to cooling, like whether it's central air or air conditioning units, or um, especially some of our older adults that,
Mm.
might have the financial capacity to get an AC unit, but they might not be able to install it. That's something I heard time and time again,
Interesting.
myself. And so anyway,
Yeah.
I just thought I'd share that with you. That
Mm.
really hit home for me.
Yeah, no, I hadn't. I That makes a lot of sense in terms of, yeah, they may very well be able to afford to get an air conditioning unit, and then they have to try and find somebody to install it. I was also thinking about the fact, like when there's extreme weather or just let's call them extreme events of some form or fashion. Also, vulnerable people tend not to go out, and so
Mm.
there's a tendency, like if we think about our, the older population, our elders, sometimes they might stay at home and all of a sudden they get to the point where they've been at home too long, they're not feeling well, they're dehydrated, so now they're really not going out. So there's a bit of that cycle too in terms of how people react to difficult situations and vulnerable people, of course. We can't assume that they're going to be able to, walk out into the street to a rec center where there might be like a cooling station. So,
Oh, 100%. Yeah. And then of course that comes with like the social isolation piece, which
yes.
which is its own kind of
Mm.
challenge and for people, and some of our unhoused neighbors as well that,
Mm.
are exposed to the elements, and if they don't have access to shelter, um then there's questions of like tree coverage and proximity to water in the community, and all these things that one might need in order to stay cool, and uh, I guess some of the more, yeah, like for folks that might need it the most, they might have the least amount of access to it.
Exactly. Yes, I
Hmm.
think that's very true. We started with a couple of workshops, having another one in a couple of weeks, and all of this is leading into, what I was mentioning about this theme this year being about, clean energy and that transition. Um, but we hear as much, right, in terms of how um, we make a lot of decisions around the urgent situations based on our average sort of perspective, and what are going to be the issues
Mm.
in that. Where frankly, I wonder if we should be starting from the perspective of actually let's plan for the most vulnerable people, because if it works for the most vulnerable people, it should work for all of us, right?
That's yeah, like that could be the point of reference, maybe. Like, yeah, that's so
Hmm.
interesting.
Hmm. Well, I mean,
Hmm.
it is kind of true, right? I mean, sometimes we come up with reasons why in the short term we might not be able to do it in terms of, like if it costs a lot to invest in buildings and
Yeah,
this and that.
yeah.
But sometimes it might be a matter of like, yeah, that long term, midterm planning, even taking
Hmm.
somewhat of a perspective to ensure that nobody gets left behind. Um, and we might be surprised to find out it's quite doable. We just have to start with our vulnerable populations in mind first.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah, it's similar to like, that was sort of our baseline where we began trying to understand heat vulnerability, was from that perspective of some of the most vulnerable folks. Um
Mm.
I think one of the challenges that I noticed just in chatting with people in the community was the this is a bit of an aside, but just, but speaking to the solutions, right? And what you said about things potentially being sometimes easier than what we might expect. I
Yeah.
think the big hurdle that we came across was that people had a difficult time imagining something else beyond the status quo when it came to, like, for
Mm.
instance, like imagining, what could cooling centers look like outside of what we already have, which is
Mm.
quite limited in most of our communities because I think some of these heat events are relatively new. And so, um, relatively recent or contemporary. And so going back to that short, medium, and long-term planning, like what can that look like from through a creative lens, you know? Um, Not that we have the answer here, but it's a good question to ask, maybe.
Yeah, no, I like that. And again, to try and unmoor ourselves from, what we've always done and to get comfortable
Yeah,
being in the creative, right?
that
Yeah.
creative space. Yeah. So
Mhm.
I guess to go off of that, what's already happening that you'd like to see more of?
In this sphere, maybe keeping the theme of energy poverty on the one side, but energy justice in terms of making sure no one's left behind. Well, the fact that there is a conversation happening, probably 2, 3 years ago, I'm not sure we were really maybe separating out the those energy poverty issues because again, for those of us average people in thinking about climate, 3% or 6% of your take-home pay doesn't sound like a lot of money. When we're talking about energy poverty, it does make a difference. So I might be able to myself absorb an extra $50 a month, let's say, if I decide, it's super hot and I'm going to have my AC blasting, all through this month. Um, that isn't a solution for everyone, right?
Hmm.
So just being able to have this conversation and really diving into like what does that mean, I think is like I say, it's only been the last couple of years, I'd say. And I'd like to see more of it coming back to sort of the conversation that we had quickly there before of starting from those who are most
Hmm.
vulnerable and sort of working from that perspective. That
Yeah.
would be sort of the what would I like to see more of? Because again, sort of reflecting back what you said, like we don't even know what creative ideas we might come up with without asking those questions.
And specifically asking those questions to the folks that they're most relevant to, like the folks that are more vulnerable. Like,
That's true.
because I think
Yeah.
one of the biggest gaps time and again with so many things like housing and food security and like that, our policy and planning isn't, there's opportunities now, I think, going forward to really engage those voices of lived experience with certain
Mm,
things, like whatever the case is, that are most people that are most impacted or that it's going to affect, to be a part of that creative thinking and that decision making, in
mhm,
some way, because
mhm.
you're, yeah, it's that
Yeah.
justice piece and
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, some of it might be also, though, that again, we might not even be thinking about all the issues. Like an example I would share, and this was one of our, uh, we had this in one of our discussions, was if I'm a single parent, even if it's in this moment, and we have an extreme weather event and there's a blackout, how do I get in touch with my child? Because I might be having to work over here, and and
Hmm.
that might not be as much of an energy justice issue in the sense that it's not about money, but it sort of is in the sense that somebody's ability maybe to leave their work is dependent on the kind of work that they do, right? I mean, we saw that during COVID. Those of us who sit at a desk were able to, transition fairly easily to working from home, where those people who had to work in a work environment, and frankly keep our economy going, a lot of them were much, they were at risk. They had to keep going to work.
Hmm.
And then you add on top any kind of maybe a weather event or an event that makes it hard to get around the city or whatever. All of a sudden, having certain income levels as well as a certain kind of work might very well make it that your perspective is quite different than what we're thinking about,
Mm.
right? Like we were just in our
Yeah.
conversation, we were talking about the cooling issues or whatever, and this person said, well, one of my first things I'm going to think about is how do I connect with my child? How do I find my child? How do I get there? Right? Because, again, when electricity is, when the power's not flowing, it's really hard to do anything, right? So,
Well, and I suppose like 100% to that. And I think, I wonder too if not just during extreme weather events, but just in day-to-day life, or where the question of transportation is also a question of justice and inequality
Mm,
because the cost of fuel, the cost of
mm,
hydro if you have an electric car. I mean, having a car alone is like grants you access to so many spaces and the capacity to pick people up and to go and access the things you need, versus maybe having to use public transportation, which can vary from place to place.
mhm,
Um, I mean, I'd love if we had a lot more public transit. But it's
mm.
just, looking in some of our communities, like there are big stark differences in access to transportation. Um,
That's true too. That makes a big, big difference. I mean, we have our public transit systems, which is great, but I sort of hear in your comment also, I mean, we don't have a foolproof system in the sense that it can be hard to get around if you don't actually have your own vehicle or access to a vehicle. Our public transit is good, but it's not foolproof, or it's not supporting those who literally have to maybe get to industrial parks that aren't, right
mhm.
downtown, right? Yeah.
Yeah, or people living in more rural communities where there just
Mhm.
isn't public transit. And
It's true.
if one doesn't have a vehicle or like that presents challenges. But I like the point you made about like different types of employment because like I have a lot of family that work in auto manufacturing, for instance, and
Mhm.
there's just no way to stay cool when you're working for 8 hours in that environment.
Mm.
Whereas myself, like I can work in an office, I can work from home, and so that how we adapt to those changes really does depend on those factors. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, no, and again, you use the language I think that we have been hearing more and more, but I think it's really important, which is lived experience. I mean,
Yeah.
how would I think of something that I've never experienced when it comes to like thinking holistically? How do we address, say, a crisis? I can only go from my lived experience, right? And
Hmm.
in terms of ensuring that no one's left behind and everybody is kept safe. That means we do have to also think about those with lived experience who are generally not at the table when we're talking about policy, right?
Yeah. That's such an important point. Yeah.
Mm. Hmm.
Um, So, I mean, we mentioned about like, some of the things that are happening that we'd like to see more of, particularly around that question of, a just transition
Hmm.
to clean energy and how we can maybe incorporate those voices of lived experience. And I guess what I'm wondering beyond that is what might you like, want, or need from the community to make some of those steps successful?
I would say, in essence, I would say a deeper commitment to collaboration, engagement and in collaboration. And that would be probably the onus would be more on those of us who are with community organizations. BAC isn't typically as frontline or grassroots, let's say. We are a collective impact organization, and our idea is to try and bring together organizations to work together. And so we have a lot of conversations like this where there's a lot of common ground, but what I think we typically seem to see is after a conversation like that, everyone gets back to the plans they already had for their own organization, as opposed to
Yeah.
trying to think about, okay, how do we find where the common ground is, maybe find common language or a common approach that we can then each of us integrate into whatever is our particular issue that we're dealing with. So then, in other words, you end up, hopefully, with a bunch of grassroots organizations or not-for-profits who within their own lane, they're using some of the same language so that we
Mm.
are able to sort of speak with one voice, let's say, which I think, you know, in politics, let's say, they talk about you say the same message over and over and over. You don't actually want to change it because it takes a few times of hearing something for it to actually really land. So
Hmm.
likewise, in our case, what I'd really need would be a community of organizations where we actually start committing to, it doesn't have to be a huge commitment at the beginning, but over time I think we'll see that if we do have a commitment to this collaboration and to finding common ground, we'll find more opportunities to do that. And in essence, then we'll see that bigger transformation, bigger and faster, that we're all looking for.
Mm. And that sounds like a very grassroots approach though to me, like the because it's like engaging community partners and residents in a community, and it's very local and directly relevant to each person's personal life. And I like that what you mentioned about like developing that shared language and understanding and commitment to that cause, because I mean what I'm hearing, correct me if I'm wrong, like what I'm hearing is that that's sort of that could be a part of building that momentum by it's not just a one and done event or conversation. It's something that keeps going and growing as it goes, and yeah, building that change from the ground up a little bit.
Yeah, no, I think very, very well said. Like I like how you've reflected that back. Thank you.
Oh, I no, it's all you. I was the word that kept coming up was momentum. So I'm like, I gotta share
Hmm.
that.
Nice. Yeah. Well, that's actually momentum is a great word because that's exactly what we're trying to do is if we do these meetings sort of sporadically, everything kind of is a, it may invigorate us, but it almost is like we're starting over. I mean, we're further down, stream,
Yeah, yeah.
but we're still kind of starting over in terms of, a topic and a conversation where there's perhaps no framework for then, okay, we've got all this great, conversation going. How do we move that into something
Hmm.
productive?
Yeah, yeah, that continues to engage people and continues to keep, yeah, because it I think it's like 1,000 challenges that require 1,000 solutions, and so many different kinds of people and voices to be a part of that.
Mhm,
At
mhm.
least that's the sense that I'm getting, like just thinking through how the complexity of what the things we're talking about, and
Yes. Well, and,
yeah,
and and
yeah.
it's basically it is because of the complexity, climate change in particular, which of course is our focus.
Hmm.
It hugely, complex, scientifically, as well as, human behaviors complicate everything that we seem to be doing, right?
Definitely.
Yeah. So,
Yeah, but thankfully we could tap into some of those helpful behaviors, like that innate sense of, shared experience or shared well, community, I guess. I keep coming back
yeah.
to that. It's abstract, but it's also really literal. It's like, well, people just coming together and saying, "Hey, we share this space. We all live here, and what can we do together to make it better?"
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that I think that's, uh, the only word that comes to mind also is that it's empowering in the sense that it feels like, you know, whether it's individuals or as a collective or as a broader community, that we hopefully don't feel as frustrated with maybe the lack of advancement because
Hmm.
I think sometimes when we're in the not-for-profit world anyways, that can sometimes also be sort of in the background having an impact. So in other words, I may feel very deeply about an issue, but we know that it sort of moves forward in fits and starts. And so again, using your language about sort of it's about building community, there's a piece of it which is also building community of, oh, well, we really are all working together. Yes, we're all in different lanes, but we really are working together. We've got, an ongoing framework for how we engage with each other, with residents, with our communities. So,
Hmm. Oh, exactly. Yeah. So, I mean, you've kind of already answered this in a few different ways, but like from where you stand, Victoria, what would be the best thing that could happen out of either the work you're doing or out of just some of the more general comments that we've made about people coming together and you know, adapting and addressing that question of justice in the climate piece. And so, like, yeah, like what would be the one of the better things that could happen out of all of that?
well, I guess the best thing that I could see that could happen would just be that we do get the enthusiasm among just if we're just focused on the energy justice piece for the moment is the enthusiasm of organizations who already work with or support underrepresented communities or vulnerable populations, marginalized people, um, getting that enthusiasm and a commitment, which
Mm,
includes a commitment in action, right? Not just in words, but in action, to a framework that is, has timelines for when we meet and discuss, maybe when, circling back from events, trying to figure out also, the way that you can get funding for that kind of an approach. Because again, a long-term approach, which can have some really big transformative effects, means a fair bit of conversation, trying to figure out that framework. And it's sometimes hard to find money for that kind of work. It often, frankly, the money is for very specific projects where you really already have a very clear idea of, say the outcomes you want and this and that. So best thing that could happen is, we have the enthusiasm, we have the commitment, we start building out that framework, and we're able to imagine a way to
mm.
support all of us doing each in our own lane, the work that needs to be done so that, we're all, sort of singing from the same page, and we also have the resources to be able to advance things in our own lane.
Yeah, I mean, it's as you were describing that, I mean, thanks for that because I was the picture that came to my mind was a whole bunch of kind of boats or ships all on the same river, and they each have
Mhm.
their own resources and their own sort of capacities and what have you, and but they're all going in the same direction together, and they're all impacted by the same river, and that's just the image that came to mind as you were describing that, and that commitment piece, like I wonder if I could ask a quick follow-up question. Like
Of course, yeah.
I wonder if that commitment, like do you find that commitment to words and action in relation to climate change, um is there a relationship between that commitment and the empowerment that we were talking about earlier? Where, because if people are engaged in this process and in this decision making, like there's a degree of empowerment there. And I guess I'd like to hope that the more empowered people feel in a topic like climate, which is huge,
Mm.
um, the more commitments you might get from individuals if they can see how they fit into that bigger puzzle. Because it
Mm.
just seems to me like, sometimes we talk about these really big topics, like housing is another example, or where I mean, climate even more so, where it's just so much bigger than each of us, but
Mhm.
and it's impacted by forces beyond us as individuals, and yet we are as individuals are impacted by it. And so, what I love about the work you're doing and the way that you're engaging the community is just to me, like it just screams empowerment. It's like you're by bringing people to the table and saying you are a stakeholder in this, and you are an agent, and you can, and also like, what can we do collectively, that collective impact if we come together,
Mm.
and what, like all of those things, I just, to me it really points to empowerment,
Mm.
especially maybe of the more vulnerable folks. And then, you know I guess what I'm wondering is there, a connection to that commitment piece that we're getting at?
Hmm. Sorry, I'm thinking about it a little bit because it's a good question.
Oh, that's, yeah, it's a big question. Yeah.
It is. Well, I guess the thing that comes to mind, I hope it has a place here because it's of another place, but
Yeah.
I think it's valuable. My dad's side of the family is principally in PEI. We do
Okay.
have some family elsewhere, but so I've spent a lot of time in summers going down to PEI and at Christmas and that.
Mm,
And it's been interesting watching also the transformation of a society of 130 or 40,000 people. So it's smaller than Burlington, right? It's,
oh, I hadn't thought about it that way. I went
yeah.
there for the
So
first time last summer.
did you?
Yeah, yeah. So anyway, sorry. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
I didn't know
that's
that.
great that you've seen it then. Because you would have, did you drive across the bridge?
We did, yes. And then we went to a beach on the North Coast. I'm trying to remember the
Oh,
name of it. But anyways, yeah, I didn't realize the population was the smaller than Burlington because we stayed right in Charlottetown, and
yeah,
it
nice.
felt small, but it felt big at the same time. Like it's got
Yeah.
everything there, but
Yep.
I just loved
Yeah.
it. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's an interesting place, I would say. And if anyone from PEI were listening to me, hopefully they won't take any offense. But it really looked to me like I'm old enough to remember, like I think I was just starting to work when they were doing the bridge. And it's really not just a bridge, it's like a highway across quite
Yeah.
an expanse, right? It's like a 15 or 20-minute drive, right?
Yeah, it's not small.
No, so that was quite an engineering feat because I believe that that's the Northumberland Strait as they call it, where it ices in the winter. And anyways, it was quite a feat. And the fact that there was a commitment from the province, ACOA, and like to get this done was, important. And then the empowerment piece, I think, was that this, unbelievable feat was completed, albeit more, by governments and whoever they hired in that. But it did then seem to lead to not that long after the province was starting to think about how they would deal with the fact of, again, not having a lot of enough landfill space, so they had to like, truck things off of the island. And they looked at, they were the first province to actually look at composting the whole province. And so
Oh.
that was something where they were inviting individuals to participate. So the first project was a government type of thing, but it was very successful. Then, when they came to doing a project that then they invited their communities, PEI Islanders got in. They got involved. They were committed to the process, and they saw the results of doing this whole island approach
Oh.
to something that in the early days of composting, it sounded like it was sort of like if you're lucky, you have it in your backyard, but to try and think of like a big system,
Like a
but
bigger
they came up with a
system.
big system. And
Wow.
so then it just looked to me like it was one thing after another of commitment, success, and then empowerment, and then it led to the next thing. So then I don't know if it came before or
Oh.
after, but then PEI started to develop these energy efficiency um, supports for homeowners and others, and people took them up, and their programs are some of the best in the country. And again, there was that cycle of this empowerment. So unlike in Ontario, where for the last couple of years people have been talking about, oh, heat pumps, it's a bit contentious, this, that, and the other. Down in PEI, lots of people have heat pumps, and it's no big deal, and they're all part of this interesting experiment. So that's the
Fascinating.
example that comes to mind when you think about, you're connecting, having a commitment with eventually seeing that empowerment.
Yeah, and being able to see and experience the impact of it too.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
I'm gonna have to
So
look that up. I wasn't aware of any of that. That's so interesting.
yeah, and yeah, again, I hope it's okay to use an example elsewhere, but I
Oh,
just
of
think because
course.
it's a
Yeah.
small province, it's one of it's the province that has some highest unemployment. Like it still has some
Hmm.
of its challenges, but it really is a good example of how that first piece of being committed, working together, collaborating, eventually leads to the empowerment. So
And maybe that like that sounds like such an antidote to that challenge of imagining something different than the status quo. Because in
yes,
that process of people coming together, addressing a thing,
yeah.
addressing a problem, and exploring new ways of doing it together in that collaboration, like that's yeah, and then you get that empowerment and that commitment to the change, and then it just snowballs from there.
Well, that's it. I mean, the success begets success, but the first part is being committed to something you maybe never have done or just feels like it's outside your comfort zone. So
Hmm.
there is a definite piece of this, and whether it's climate action or getting being really seriously committed to solving issues maybe of poverty or um, choose your social issue really.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, there's definitely a piece of it which is to just venture outside of our the way we've always done it and our comfort zone.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, that doing things differently can be very uncomfortable.
Yeah, that's
But that's
true.
not always a bad thing either.
Yeah,
Yeah. In fact, it
yes,
can be
true.
very good as we're discussing. But
Oh, exactly.
um yeah,
Yeah.
so I mean that's actually a beautiful example of the last question I had for you. But just in case there's anybody else that you had in mind,
Mm.
Victoria, who else is doing important work to address energy poverty and inequality in the community that you appreciate?
I would say, I mean, we are focused on the Bay Area being Burlington and Hamilton. I mean, I actually I learned a lot about what's going on in Burlington as it impacts energy poverty and therefore, energy justice sort of efforts by reading a report that CDH
Oh,
delivered this year. So it really got me thinking about it because again, Burlington is we have quite a few communities around sort of the GT, the Greater Toronto and Hamilton area
mm-hmm.
where it's suburban, it's sort of bedroom communities as it's called. So it sometimes becomes hard to find the community members that are being impacted by poverty generally and energy poverty. So connecting with your organization, frankly, has been super. It's been very helpful in terms of us getting an idea of where we can, what's going on in Burlington, where we can find people, communities where people, there might be a higher percentage of people
Mm.
facing these kinds of issues. So you guys are the first ones to come to mind on, in Burlington anyways. So.
Oh, that's lovely. It's so nice to hear. Thank you. Yeah, we and it's funny because like our approach to even I mean I guess when we've done similar initiatives, whether it's on climate or otherwise, like, the first question was, who are the community connectors? Who are the champions in the
Mm,
community that are really connected with all different kinds of people, whether it's through like organizing community meals or whether it's, folks that do outreach
mm,
efforts or, or put together resources for different programs and just there's all these people that are often just working behind the scenes that don't always get um a lot of recognition for the amazing work that they do, but
mm.
I've really learned a lot from some of those connectors, we like to call them. It's and so that really means a lot that you saw us that way too. It's because I think that that's the goal or the hope, that we can be that that we can be a connector as well, and um, yeah, bring people together and try to work towards
Yeah.
something.
Yeah. Well, I mean, yeah, I mean, CDH also connected us with other organizations that we could work with in Burlington and holding some workshops. So, yeah, I would certainly say that CDH is, for us anyways, has been one of those connector organizations. Um, so yeah, thank you very much for that support.
Oh, well, thank you very much for this conversation, and it's been great to learn more about all things climate and the work that you're doing with Bay Area Climate Change Council. And it's yeah, I'm looking forward to being a part of more events that you're doing and engage people, voices in the community, and see what we can imagine that might be new
Yeah.
and different, and how we can empower one another in that work. So
Yeah.
yeah,
No,
I
my.
really appreciate that.
Well, I look forward to it too. I appreciate also that you thought of, doing this interview slash conversation for your podcast. I really appreciate it. Though the Bay Area Climate Change Council is again focused on climate mitigation, right? So that's the long-term focus is to get us back to that place where we're in that equilibrium that we all
Mm,
know. This issue of energy justice may seem like only a small piece of it, but it's one of those examples where it really does impact people's lives and their quality of life on a day-to-day basis, right? So the
hmm.
um, yeah, I look forward to working further with you, using the kind of data and research that you guys do because we're not a research organization. So yeah, thank you.
Oh, well, that's lovely. And yeah, like I just all I can think of is that, getting to that equilibrium really is a relational process,
Mm,
if that's fair
hmm.
to say. Yeah, that's sort of my understanding so far, is like that if it takes us all to come together, and it's very deeply relational and human, and getting people, yeah. I appreciate that.
Me too.
Yeah, oh, thank you so much,
Um,
Victoria. Yeah, is there anything that you'd like to say in closing?
I guess what I would, in closing, the thing that comes to mind again, because we had these workshops where we connected with residents. It was, quite a diversity. We really tried to ensure that we had, recent newcomers, a variety of people who could speak from different perspectives and bring their lived experience. But one of the themes that I got out of it, which just reinforces what you and I have just been talking about, though, is the sense of community that even we saw out of a workshop, and how empowering it is to have that sense of community, using that language of empowering again. But
Mm.
there is actually a piece of this which is also about rebuilding and continuing to be committed to rebuilding community. And I use the
Mm.
language of rebuilding because I think there was a time in the past where we did need to depend on each other a little bit more than our modern times require us to. So we have our own communities, but our physical community sometimes is not that. So in other words, I get in my car to go to hang out with my community that happens to be in Toronto or happens to be in
Hmm.
Brantford, or whatever, rather than understanding and knowing my local
The
community.
local.
And yeah, in closing, I think all of what we're doing, I think there's a piece of it which, creating community brings value and quality of life to people, regardless of who they are. That is something
Hmm.
that, we all could benefit from having more of.
That sense of belonging.
Yes, exactly. Yes, belonging.
Hmm.
Mm,
Hmm.
yeah.
Oh, that's a lovely point to end on, I think. Yeah. Well, thank you very much, Victoria. And we definitely look forward to having more conversations with you and learning more about all things Bay Area Climate Change Council and all the things that we're both involved in. And
Yeah.
yeah, very much look forward to the continued conversation.
Me too.